COVID-19 is in our communities and the number of cases is on the rise. So it's essential that we each play our part in full by following all of the government guidance. Only by doing this can we keep our schools and businesses open. If you're young and healthy, you may feel the virus isn't a threat to you. But someone more vulnerable to coronavirus than you, perhaps someone closer to you than you realise, is depending on you to play your part in breaking the chain of transmission. So I'm asking everyone to do their bit. Stick to the rule of 6 for gatherings indoors or outdoors. Wash your hands thoroughly and regularly. Wear a face covering in enclosed spaces. Observe social distancing of 2 metres or 1 metre plus precautions where 2 metres really isn't possible. Follow all of the guidelines about car sharing. If you have symptoms, self-isolate and get a free test immediately. If we work together on this, we can control the spread of the virus. Thank you.
My name's Jonathan Gribbin. I'm the Director of Public Health for Nottinghamshire County, and I'd like to tell you about the COVID-19 Local Outbreak Control Plan for Nottinghamshire. It's all about containing the virus so that we can protect one another, safeguard our critical services, and enable our schools, our workplaces, our communities to flourish again. And the plan describes how we will do that in Nottinghamshire. It complements the national test and trace arrangements, and it builds on local arrangements with key partners like Public Health England, the district and borough councils, the city council and our local NHS. It identifies a range of settings such as schools, workplaces, universities, care homes and so on, which require specific plans to deal with any fresh outbreaks of the virus. It describes how we'll be monitoring on a daily basis to spot if there are any new outbreaks, and then coordinating action to investigate and deal with them, deploying extra testing capacity if we need to, or contact tracing as appropriate. The plan also deals with how we will continue to provide support for people who are made vulnerable because they need to self-isolate, and we'll be doing that through our community support hub. And we'll refine the plan as we go along to reflect the latest best practice and the information which government will be providing to the council. Finally, I want to acknowledge the lengths to which so many people and organisations have gone to already in recent months to stick with the guidance, to maintain social distancing of 2 metres wherever possible, to wash your hands thoroughly and frequently, to stay at home if you or someone in your household has symptoms, to get tested and to follow the advice that you receive when you get the result. By observing the guidance, you're protecting not only your own life and livelihood, that of your friends and also your loved ones, but also that of people you may never meet, but people who you're depending on and whom we must each depend as well. Your role in that is critical. Thank you for your help to contain the virus.
This winter, more than ever, with COVID-19 still circulating, we need help to reduce all avoidable risks. You can help protect the NHS, social care and loved ones by getting the flu vaccine. You may be eligible for the free vaccine at your GP or local pharmacy if you are over 65, pregnant or have a long-term condition. Find out if you are eligible at nhs.uk/stay well. Children.
Good morning, sir.
Morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
This is the third day of the hearing into the Nottinghamshire Minerals Local Plan, and this morning's session we are looking at the policy MP12, which is a minerals provision policy for oil and gas. Firstly, we have some participants here today. Is there anyone here from ACOM?
Yes, it's Paul Foster from ACOM.
Right. And you're representing Egdon Resources?
That's correct, yes.
Is there anyone else here from your company?
No, sir.
Okay, UK onshore oil and gas.
Good morning, sir. My name's Ken Cronin. I'm the CEO of UKOG, with a trade association for onshore oil and gas, and I am joined by my colleague Charles McAllister.
Thank you. iGas Energy.
Good morning. So my name is Ross Glover. I'm the Development Director at iGas Energy.
Eversall, Stanton Hill and Skegby Neighbourhood Forum.
Good morning, sir. My name's Andrew Jenkins. I'm the co-chair of the Neighbourhood Forum.
Thank you. And Frack Free Misson.
Yeah, good morning, sir. My name's Dennis May on behalf of Frack Free Misson.
Okay. Is there anyone else here who we haven't mentioned so far? Okay. And could the council officers introduce yourselves, please?
Good morning, sir. Steve Osborne-James, Minerals Local Plan Team Leader.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning, sir. Suzanne Osborne-James, the Planning Policy Team at Nottinghamshire County Council.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning, sir. Catherine Haley, Nottinghamshire County Council Planning Policy Team.
Thank you.
Good morning, sir. Rachel Clack, Solicitor, Legal Services, Nottinghamshire County Council.
Good morning, sir. Jonathan Smith, the Team Manager of the Development Management Team at the County Council.
And finally, Sally Gill, Group Manager Planning, Nottinghamshire County Council.
One more, sir. Graham Keane, Queen's Counsel for the county.
Thank you. Okay, I'll just run over briefly the virtual arrangements. Please use the hands up facility if you wish to speak, and that is the hand symbol at the top of the screen. I ask that you please don't use the screen share facility during this hearing, and please switch off your microphones at all times when you're not speaking. You can, of course, switch off your camera as well. If in the event anyone loses internet connection and has difficulty reconnecting, please contact the Programme Officer Ian Kemp and he will get you reconnected. The progress so far with the plan, I produced my matters, issues and questions and supplementary questions, and the Council and other participants have provided their responses in the form of hearing statements, and these are in the examination library, which is on the County Council's website. There is a hearing programme and an agenda, and they are on the website as well. The participants that are listed in the programme for each session will have the opportunity to put their cases, and others will have the opportunity to respond, and I may also have some questions. My role is to consider the soundness of the plan in accordance with the criteria set out in the National Planning Policy Framework. And the purpose of the hearing sessions is to assist me in this. The starting point is that the Council has submitted a plan that it considers to be sound. If you are challenging the soundness of the plan, then you must explain why you think it is unsound and what changes would make it sound. I have read and will take into account all of the original representations that were made, and there is no need for these to be repeated. Instead, I would like the discussion to move on from those submissions and deal with any specific questions that I may have, or any areas where further clarification or explanation is required. And at times I may ask for a more general contribution or a summary of your position. Please keep your comments focused on the matter in hand and avoid commenting on unrelated matters. In speaking during the hearing, I ask that you are concise and specific. And in particular, if you wish to highlight any parts of your statement or other documents, then that will be helpful to me when reporting. Any questions that I may ask do not indicate that I have made up my mind. Such questions are intended to provide clarification and to test the evidence. The Council has prepared a list of modifications to the plan, and that is in the examination library. The final schedule of main modifications will be subject to further consultation before I prepare my report, and the examination will remain open until my report is submitted to the Council. No further representations or evidence will be accepted after the hearing sessions have finished unless I specifically request this. The entitlement to speak on a particular policy only exists where previous representations have been made on it and where changes are sought. So discussion on each policy is limited to those listed. As the purpose is to hear views on whether the policies are sound, it is not permissible to hear comments in support of particular policies or allocations, or about any sites which are not proposed for allocation. Are there any questions before we start? Okay, right, policy MP12, oil and gas. Shall we deal first with the representatives of the oil and gas industry? Mr. Foster first, please. Before starting, I draw your attention to modification. It's reference PM33, and that's a modification which deletes parts 1A and part 2A of the policy. So we're left with part 1B and part 2B and part 3. That's what remains in the policy. Mr. Foster, do you have any comments that you wish to start off with?
Thank you, sir. Yes, my name is Paul Foster. I represent Egdon Resources UK Limited. Egdon have a number of interests in production and exploration development licenses within Nottinghamshire, and they are an operator as well within the county. We welcome the proposed changes that the County Council are making to the policy with regard to deleting parts 1A and 2A. And we have no issue with policy element 1B. Our focus is on policy 2B as remaining. That is the fact that commercial production of oil and gas will be supported provided the site and equipment are located at the least sensitive location, taking account of environmental, geological and technical factors. And my view, my professional view, is that that element of the policy is not sound, on the basis that it's not justified and it's not consistent with national policy. I'm going to set out my reasons as to why that's the case. The first point I wanted to make was that exploration is the most intensive phase of hydrocarbon extraction, involving considerable amount of HGV movements, soil stripping, changing the landscape, drilling, a very intensive period, albeit for a temporary period only, whilst commercial production is considerably less intensive, albeit over a longer period of time. The second point I wanted to make was regard to its consistency with national policy, and I would refer you here, sir, to paragraph 102 of the Minerals Planning Policy Guidance. And this sets out how local authorities and operators should approach applying for planning permission for additional appraisal and commercial sites. And the guidance states that additional sites for appraisal or production will be selected by the operator, taking account of their ability to access the reserve, while seeking to minimise or avoid any adverse environmental or amenity issues. So the focus is very much upon the operator in their choosing of the site, while seeking to minimise impacts, environmental impacts. And the 2 points I wanted to draw from that is that there is a collective approach in national guidance to appraisal and production sites, whilst policy 2B seems to strip away appraisal and just separates the proposal for commercial production. So there is a difference there, I see, between national and this local policy. And the other point I would make is that there's no reference to least sensitive location within the national guidance in the Minerals PPG. The point I would also go on to is that I've been involved in onshore hydrocarbon work as a planning consultant since 2007. And in that time, I have obtained planning permission for 7 sites for commercial production in England, predominantly in the East Midlands, for 4 separate operators, 2 of which are in Nottinghamshire. And in each of those 7 locations for production, they were all the subject of exploration and appraisal. There were no instances where an alternative site was selected for commercial production once a site had been explored. And that's not unsurprising, because operators will invest a considerable amount of money in developing a well site at the exploration stage. So there's a lot of investment already spent. They would have secured a significant amount of geological data, having drilled that site, so they will be familiar and confident about the amount of commercial reserves available. And thirdly, they will have an agreement in place with the landowner for commercial production. So my point there is that they are not going to be looking afresh at a whole range of new sites when they move to commercial production. The likelihood, the pragmatic approach, is that they will be identifying existing sites that have already been explored for that particular mineral. So in asking applicants to identify the least sensitive location, rather suggests a completely fresh approach in identifying a site for production, when in reality, it's going to be more about focusing on the existing site. My fourth point, and I just want to make this, is that there's no description in the policy as to what least sensitive actually means. There's no guidance in the supporting document. And we could have a situation where a particular site for commercial production, for example, had extremely good landscape screening, but had poor access. Or it might have no impact on ecological impacts, but it may be within a flood risk area. So there's a lot to weigh up in identifying what is a least sensitive location. And if you decided, sir, to remain with that policy and those words, then I think we would want to see some caveat suggesting as far as possible, or taking account of the fact that from a practical point of view, a site search area needs to be limited to a particular location and can't be extensive. So those are my 4 points I wanted to draw to your attention, sir, in respect of policy 2B. And my proposal is that policy 2B could probably be subsumed into 1B, so that the policy would read exploration, appraisal and commercial production of oil and gas are located where this will not have an unacceptable environmental impact, and do away with policy 2 altogether.
Okay, thank you. Right, Mrs. Osborne-James, please.
Thank you, sir. Yes, just to sort of set a little bit of background to this policy. At the time the first plan was being drafted, it was very much an emerging area. We've been through a number of iterations of this policy into the current plan and revising it in light of responses received. We have relied heavily initially on the regulations that we referred to, and have now amended the policy in that respect. I suspect the phrasing about least sensitive area was drawn from either practice guidance or a best practice note, or something that we found in the regulations at the time. I think in the light of the discussion and in terms of the points of merging parts of the policy, this is an area we are happy to go away and look at this again to make sure this is fully in line with what's in the framework.
Okay, so as regards the comments made by Mr. Foster, then you're willing to. Mr. Foster made a couple of suggestions. Mr. Keane, would you like to come in there?
So yes, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just going to say that, and obviously listened to Mrs. Osborne-James just now, and we haven't really had a chance to discuss this, but I have to say I see the force in what Mr. Foster has just explained in relation, firstly, to the approach in PPG paragraph 102, I think, or 27102, and it would seem to me that the policy could be streamlined and just as effective if, as was suggested a moment ago, production was added to part 1 and the focus then turned to whether or not there would be an unacceptable environmental impact, because that would then be consistent with the approach of the guidance, as well as frankly making a simpler, a more straightforward and understandable policy. But if you, so those are my thoughts, having heard Mr. Foster's contribution and Mrs. Osborne-James. But if we could leave it there in terms for now, sir, and we'll look at that, add that to the list of things that we'll look at. But as, if it helps, I think that seems to me to be a sensible approach, if I may say so.
Yes, yes, that's helpful. Thank you, Mr. Foster. Do you want to come back on that at all?
Sir, thank you. I just wanted to thank the officers for responding positively to my comments, and I welcome very much the fact that they'll go away and have a look at my suggested changes in the wording.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay. Mr. Cronin or Mr. McAllister, for UK onshore oil and gas, please. I suspect some of what you wanted to say may have already been covered, but do you have any other points that you wish to raise at this point?
Thank you, sir. You're absolutely right. Quite a lot of what Mr. Foster has said we agree with, and we thank the officers for turning positively to those suggestions. We support the removal of 1A and 1B. Protected areas is clearly an area that's well covered in the MPPF and also in terms of the Infrastructure Act 2015. And also in terms of the development management policies in terms of number 4 and number 6. Overall, and you'll hear probably me say this quite a lot, I think the ethos of MP12 is to direct people to the various different management policies and also national policies, and that's something we support.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Glover, please.
Thank you, sir. Nothing to add other than to say we echo both Mr. Cronin and Mr. Foster's comments. Okay,
thank you. Mr. Keane.
So just a very small point for the avoidance of any doubt. Mr. Cronin said that he welcomed the removal of 1A and 1B. Of course, what's being proposed is that 1A and 2A come out, and in the light of what I said a few moments ago, that effectively 2B would, because it would be merged, everything would be merged into one. So the substance of the policy, MP12, would effectively be 1B, and what is presently number 3, but would presumably become 2. John, I suspect that's what Mr. Cronin meant, but just for the avoidance of any doubt, can I make that clear?
Absolutely, you're absolutely right. Apologies.
Okay, thank you. Okay, can we move on, please, to the neighbourhood forum? And that's Mr. Jenkins, please.
Yes, thank you very much, sir. We relate to the statement of the plan in paragraph 4.109 on page 94. It's considered that there is no justifiable reason in planning policy terms to separate shale gas from other hydrocarbon development. Our neighbourhood plan was supported by 3/4 of those who voted in the referendum, and it shows the community's commitment to its policies and principles. And one of those principles is to pursue policies and objectives that reduce the neighbourhood's greenhouse gas emissions to a verifiably sustainable level. And Minister Greg Clark, when he introduced the localism legislation, said, "For too long, the government has hoarded and concentrated power, and it leaves people feeling done to and imposed upon, the opposite of the sense of participation and involvement on which a healthy democracy thrives. We think the best way of strengthening society is not for central government to try and seize all the power and responsibility." And 92% of our residents gave the surrounding countryside and its access as the main reason they like living in the area. The community vision endorsed by the community states, in 20 years' time, the plan area will be a prosperous and thriving community. It will value its rural heritage and high quality natural environment, provide people with employment, education and relaxation, and be a regenerated place where everyone can fulfill their potential. And among the objectives in our community objectives is to protect and maintain the trails, open spaces and access to the open countryside that make the plan area so special. We have a variety of open spaces and green corridors, including reclaimed land after heavy industrialization for mining. The plan also highlights the tourism potential, and we see a huge potential to increase tourism. And we see that the award-winning Tebessel Caravanning and Camping Club site on Silver Hill is being doubled in size. So the continued existence of unspoiled views and lack of industrial activity are essential to preserve these settings. And this is a theme running through our neighbourhood plan. So forum members unanimously oppose any further hydrocarbon exploitation in the area, which is now defined by its post-industrialised character and offers us new opportunities. So we support the Nottinghamshire County Council in developing and implementing a minerals local plan. However, we believe that experience elsewhere and the growing scientific evidence shows that there are, for example, the following specific, special and very substantial threats from shale gas exploitation and extraction in terms of community health risks from air and water pollution, damage and destruction of valued amenities through industrial development and heavy transport on rural roads, a significant risk of triggering earthquakes, especially in an area of extensive old mineral workings, and a clear conflict with government undertakings at COP21 to reach zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. We don't think that this undertaking has been properly taken into account in the overall framing of the plan. So we believe that these and other factors do provide justifiable reason in planning policy terms to separate shale gas from other hydrocarbon development. And we therefore call upon the County Council to give proper consideration to the risks of shale gas development and to develop a clear and well thought specific policy for this. And we also propose amendments to the wording of SO3 and policy SP3 to include objective and policy wording changes from should to must or will, following the example of the East Riding and Northumberland Minerals plans, which agreed with this approach. And we request a specific reference to the 2050 net zero target and a more nuanced balance with the great weight for minerals linked to these requirements. Finally, I would like to say that the people of our three villages wish to hold the council to account for this responsibility and request that in accordance with the Localism Act, their wishes as expressed in our neighbourhood plan should be respected. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Mrs. Osborne-James, I'd be grateful. Could you respond to Mr. Jenkins' point, please, about there should be a separate policy for shale gas. That should be separated out from the other from MP12.
Thank you, sir.
Are there sort of specific impacts in Nottinghamshire that need to be covered by more detailed criteria?
We don't feel that is the case, sir. We have, both in the previous version of the plan and the plan you have before you now, and indeed in our existing adopted plan, there's always been a single policy for oil and gas development that is intended to cover all forms. In terms of national policy on this, I don't think there are distinctions drawn there in terms of there needing to be separate policies. It's about whether the policy can control those impacts and appropriate locations. For the reasons set out in our written statements to you, we feel the plan does that. The policies need to be read as a whole. We feel that that policy, as amended, in combination with all of the development management policies, the strategic policies of the plan that cover matters such as landscape, water quality, air quality, all of the range of issues that have been raised. The plan does need to be read as a whole. I think we would also point to the current situation in terms of fracking and the sort of suspension of that at the moment. It perhaps highlights the benefits of having a single policy that covers all types of oil and gas activity. So we don't see the need to have a separate policy on that.
Okay, and Mr. Jenkins also referred, sort of going back in the plan, to strategic objective 3 and strategic policy 3. That the words should be substituted for a stronger word such as must or will. What are your comments on that, please?
Thank you, sir. I'm sort of trying to recall the conversations during that matter when this was, if this was brought up during that conversation.
Yes, I think it was. Yes, it was a question of obviously it relates to climate change, and
I think it's possibly a point also raised by Friends of the Earth and
yes.
dealt with in our written response, that we felt the wording there is in line with the national policy. We would also have a difficulty in that if you inserted must there, the policies are intended to be positively worded, and you would then have a policy that's inconsistent with the remainder of the policies in the plan. I can see that my colleague, development management colleague, Mr. Smith, possibly wants to add something to this.
Okay, Mr. Smith, please.
Thank you, sir. Yes, it was really just to pick up on a couple of matters. So Mr. Jenkins made, various comments to his community's neighbourhood plan, and clearly you'll be aware that once a neighbourhood plan is adopted, it does form part of the development plan, and so would need to be the policies in it would need to be taken into account in any decisions made on planning applications. And I just wanted to further just support the comments made by Mrs. Osborne James in terms of where the policy direction is looking to go in terms of MP12, and then her comments on the policy framework we have in our existing Minerals Local Plan. We have a policy M5.1 on mineral exploration, which simply says that proposals for mineral exploration will be permitted subject to satisfactory environmental amenity and reclamation safeguards. We've dealt with two large, very contentious planning applications in Nottinghamshire for shale gas exploration, and that policy has been at the centre of the consideration of those planning applications, albeit that clearly we also take into account the full suite of policies in the Minerals Local Plan, and we would clearly do so in any new Minerals Local Plan, as well as taking into account any other material considerations, such as and clearly as well. I'd just like to just point out that clearly that the shale gas is a multi-regulatory process, and clearly there are other regulatory regimes which the shale gas operators need to work to. So I'm fully supportive of the policy with the changes being suggested, and feel that will provide a strong framework for decision making in the future.
Okay, thank you. I have one question. The PPG in paragraph 27 expects criteria-based policies for exploration, appraisal and production phases of hydrocarbon extraction, which should set clear guidance for the location and assessment of hydrocarbon extraction. Are the criteria in policy MP12, are they sufficiently detailed to provide clear guidance on location and assessment? And that's I'll put that question to the council.
So I think in response to that, and in light of the discussions we've had this morning, that's something we would like to sort of take a look at and wrap up in the whole reconsideration of that element of the policy, if that's okay with you, sir.
Okay. Right. Okay. Well, shall we sort of leave that there for the time being? Mr. Smith, do you wish to say anything there?
Sorry, sir, I'm struggling to find the reference you just made.
It's the planning practice guidance,
yeah,
on minerals, and it's paragraph 27.
Right, give me a second.
I'm looking at 27, and it's on identifying site parameters.
Yes, that's what I'm reading the same as Mr. Keane. Identifies site parameters which may increase potential impacts from dust.
Oh, right. Okay. Yes, this is the planning practice guidance on minerals rather than, it's not the minerals planning policy guidance.
Sir, if it helps, we have a reference here to paragraph 106 of the planning practice guidance, in terms of referring to those three, the criteria for exploration, appraisal and production phases.
Yes.
On that basis, I think the policy as it is presently drafted, looking to support those types of development, as long as they're located where they would not have an unacceptable environmental impact. I think does provide the basis for robust decision making, taking on board other policies in the plan and other material considerations.
Yes. So yes. Right, so what you're saying is that the suite of policies as a whole, when the plan is read as a whole, they provide the criteria.
I do, yes.
Yes, I see. Okay, and Mr. Keane.
So thank you. I just it's not on the last point you raised, but just coming back to should or must, if I may, if it's convenient. So, couple of thoughts on that. The council obviously considers that the use of the word should in the policy is effective and reflects the positive approach embodied in national policy, for example, 16B of the framework. And I think the other thing to bear in mind is alternative terms such as must or will would not be consistent with other comparable policies in the plan. The statutory requirement in section 19(1)A of the 2004 Act, of course, does state that plans must include policies to secure the development and use of the land in the authority's area contribute to the mitigation of and adaptation to climate change. But so that's obviously a requirement on the authority to include relevant policies rather than mandating, as it were, how specific development plan policies should be worded. And just a couple of other references that might assist in due course. The framework at para 149 outlines that how plans should take a proactive approach to mitigating and adapting to climate change, and that policies should support appropriate measures to ensure the future resilience of infrastructure and communities to climate change impact. So I think that those reasons, as well as the ones you heard from the officers a few moments ago, the council says that the wording as drafted is entirely consistent with the approach of national policy.
Okay, thank you. And Mrs. Osborne-James, please.
Sorry, sir, I didn't intend. I forgot to take my hand off. I've hopefully taken it off now.
Right, and Mr. Smith, please.
Likewise, sir, I do apologise.
Okay.
I'd left my hand up, sorry.
All right, okay. And Mr. Jenkins, you'd like to come back there? Your microphone's on mute at the moment.
Yes, thank you, sir, and thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for the council for the different responses. The point I just finally like to make briefly is that I think The wording may be compliant and internally consistent, and there is certainly a reference to mitigation of climate change, but I would like the council to consider whether they have fully taken into account the current commitment to zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, and indeed within that context, we doubt whether any oil and gas development is appropriate in that situation. But certainly, I think the overall wording throughout should be strengthened in respect to that commitment. And I expect further commitments to emerge in the next COP session in Scotland later this year or early next year. So I think the situation in terms of national policy has actually evolved since the original draft of the Minerals Plan, and we would request the Council to consider that carefully in terms of any revisions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Cronin.
Thank you, sir. Going back to the point on planning practice guidance, etc. If you look at the planning practice guidance for oil and gas, it lists a number of different areas like odour, noise, lighting, traffic, cumulative impact, air, and landscape, and we believe that they are covered throughout in terms of the development management policies, particularly DM1, DM9, and DM8. And so we think they are the issues identified in the planning practice guidance are covered by the DM policies. And in terms of climate change, we'll probably come on to that. So I'll leave it there for now.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Osborne-James.
Thank you, sir. I just wanted to pick up on the comments made by Mr. Jenkins there, and obviously fully appreciate the reasons why he's making those. I would, however, like to point out that it isn't the role of this particular plan to set either national energy policy or the targets in terms of future emissions. However, we have referred in earlier sessions, which Mr. Jenkins may not have been present at, to putting references into the plan in a number of places to highlight that commitment to the net zero target by 2050. I think, if I haven't actually got the reference in front of me, but it is set out in the proposed modifications.
All right, okay.
I believe it will be in the supporting text after policy.
Yes, I think it's PM40. Oh no, sorry. No, that's
sorry,
right.
my colleague was just reminding me, PM12, which I think is the introductory text just ahead of policy SP3 on climate change. I believe there may be another point at which that is inserted, but I'm just... Sorry, so we can't call that up at the moment, but certainly there is that commitment there to add the reference in ahead of policy SP3.
Yes. Yes, okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And we have Mr. May here from Frat-Free Missen.
Hello, sir. Yes.
I mean, some of your points may have already been covered, but
you have to forgive me, sir. I'm not a planner. I'm a lay person here. It is a bit of I'm a bit of a fish out of water in that regard. One thing I did pick up though, studying one element of I think it was the mineral planning guidance, was that with regard to selected sites, the option of directional drilling should also be taken into account. So to say that a site, a specific site must be used, there is somewhere in the guidance an element of qualification with regards to directional drilling. I can try and find that later, but I say I'm not a planner. I'm not that 100% familiar with it, but I did read through it. Further to, I mean, with regards to the soundness of the plan, we'd like to look at the justifications for the plan, really. 4104, I think, is outdated, obviously, because it quotes 2020. It says by 2020 we will need to import 3/4 of our primary energy needs. That has not manifested itself. As of last year, imports only accounted for some 35%. There's been a huge shift in the energy climate within the UK and the manner in which energy sources are manifesting themselves. And the section that says there is a national need to explore and develop new domestic sources of gas, this must seriously be questioned. The government 2017 Gas Security of Supply report stated that energy security will not be dependent upon new indigenous sources. So as a reflection of government policy, I think that that statement is wrong, is erroneous. And Mr. Kwarteng, the Secretary of State for BEIS, stated at the dispatch box last month that the moratorium on fracking will not impact energy security. So I think that this needs to be changed. Statement 4104 is outdated, inaccurate, and does not reflect current energy trends. And also, we feel, I mean, having been in the anti-fracking movement, we feel the tone of 104 indicates that it carries outdated fracking industry propaganda to a certain extent, and such material, the plan should be more objective. And I'd suggest, I would like to propose something on the line of 4101 for underground coal gasification, where it gives a statement of fact regarding the process and the fact that shale gas may provide energy in the future. Obviously, with a moratorium in place at the moment, things are very much in doubt that way. I think it has to be recognised that the current situation in terms of shale gas is probably unprecedented in mineral planning terms. The earthquakes in Lancashire and the moratorium bridged the consultation phase of this plan and post-date the drafting of this plan. And the removal of government support has halted the specific means of mineral extraction. We recognise that you said we weren't here to change the plan, but notwithstanding, it has to be recognised that some factors bearing on the plan have changed and the ground has somewhat shifted in that regard. With regards 4105, I acknowledge your comments, previously written comments regarding the previous version of the MPPF, but I feel this also bears on 4.108 and what Mr. Jenkins referred to, separating shale gas from conventional. So I would consider these two passages jointly. Shale gas is a widespread resource and would require widespread development, and it has to work at scale and speed with inevitable in-train cumulative impacts. At an industry conference in 2019, the development director of iGas stated the company's desired intent for simultaneous development of 4 or 6 well pads with drilling equipment being repeatedly moved between them. It was also stated in the scenario, quote, as wells are drilled, there is effectively concurrent exploration, appraisal and development, contrary to conventional operations. This is a totally different scenario compared to conventional oil and gas. And as a result, the planning impacts are exponentially greater and the risks to the communities are exponentially greater too. So we therefore justify that shale gas should have separate considerations. UQ estimates to reduce gas imports by 50% over 15 years would require 100 well pads with up to 40 wells on each. This equates to drilling and fracturing 5 wells per week, and approximately 25% of licence areas cover 60% of Nottinghamshire, the majority of which are coincident with abandoned mine workings and the Sherwood Sandstone Aquifer. In terms of planning impacts, it is unsound to compare shale gas with conventional operations. Further to that, excuse me a minute, there is a definition of fracking. hydraulic fracturing in the minerals planning guidance that was accepted by North Yorkshire's Minerals Plan, which is yet to be adopted, and we feel that the current moratorium is permeable in some regards. Fracking can still take place under the moratorium. Excuse me a minute. The government made a presumption against giving ministerial consent to hydraulic fracturing as defined under the Infrastructure Act. However, hydraulic fracturing has got various definitions in various documents, etc. And so we believe that the definition as adopted or as accepted by the inspector for the North Yorkshire Plan should be adopted with this plan as well. A key point to make: unlike conventional developments, hydraulic fracturing for shale gas carries a proven, foreseeable and significant risk of induced seismicity. Systems and methodologies used to implement and justify means of mitigation have failed to such an extent as to bring about a change in government policy. The MPPF para 178 considers risks from former mining activities. It is agreed. And MP12, paragraph 2, if that is that still in? Yes, least sensitive locations concerns the locations of the site. However, given the history of unacceptable levels of induced seismicity resulting from all attempts at UK shale gas development, given the conclusions of the Oil and Gas Authority that it is currently not possible to accurately predict the probability and magnitude of earthquakes linked to fracking operations, and also given the history of extensive coal mining in Nottinghamshire and the resultant compromised geology, we request that areas affected by coal mining should be identified as a planning constraint in shale gas development. Now, I understand that you made a reference to constraint on MP12 with regards to the monitoring and information tables. You'll have to forgive my lack of familiarity with the planning system. I wasn't aware of the meaning of it at the time, but realised it in further work. We have submitted a suggested policy with regards seismicity. We know that changing the plan is exceptional circumstances, but we believe that this policy addresses the aforementioned specified, proven and very significant risk. The moratorium, the written ministerial statement for the moratorium states that the Oil and Gas Authority is unlikely to improve for hydraulic fracturing plans, and there is a presumption against granting ministerial consent for associated hydraulic fracturing. And future applications will still be considered on their own merits. So the idea that there's an absolute moratorium is a bit permeable. It's been mooted by one licence holder in Nottinghamshire that lifting the moratorium could be a political as opposed to a scientific decision. The constraints are therefore porous, but however, the physical risks will remain. And I will echo Councillor Constance in his opening statement: the mineral plan needs to be robust and up to date. While the MPPF states that duplication of policies should be avoided, it also requires that they be clear and unambiguous. We submit that the proposed policy is in alignment with the latter condition under the current circumstances. It has specific relevance to Nottinghamshire and therefore will aid planners in making evidence-backed and justified decisions. Given that the MPPF states that non-strategic policies should be reviewed every 5 years, we take the position that the proposed policy is a reasonable and proportionate measure for the Mineral Planning Authority given the current situation. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Keane.
So, yes, I'll ask Mr. Smith to come in on some of the more detailed points that have just been raised, glossaries, areas of coal mining, etc. But could I just pick up a couple of points that hopefully might clarify matters for Mr. May and others, and make a few things clear. Paragraph 4.104, which Mr. May read parts of, he'll be pleased to hear that it's proposed to be deleted in the proposed modifications. That's PM34, so the whole paragraph comes out. 4105 is also a paragraph that's subject to amendment. I won't read the suggested text, sir, but that's PM35. Third point, while I've got the proposed mods in front of me, this isn't Mr. May's point, but so do you recall Mrs. Osborne-James said there was a second reference to net zero in the proposed mods? It's PM 15. Just let me double check that's right. Yes, so amending paragraph 335 to add a sentence, any potential for cumulative impacts on climate change as a result of the nature and scale of new movement should be also be taken into consideration, and reference to policy DM8 specifically covering the issue of cumulative impacts. And last point from me, sir, at the moment, the moratorium, of course, has not removed government support per se. It's effectively a temporary ban on fracking. Mr. Smith might have some more to say about that. Thank you, sir.
Yes, thank you, sir. Yeah, I concur with that last point about the moratorium. Just going back to the points about the yes, Nottinghamshire's rich history of mining. We are required in development management. We are required to consult the Coal Authority, and we have done on applications in the past. We have maps which indicate areas that are of no, low or high risk in terms of mining. Those maps are provided to us by the Coal Authority, and we consult the Coal Authority on that basis. If there is benefit to making a cross-reference to that in the plan, then I'm sure colleagues in policy team could draft some wording which possibly go in the glossary or something like that to that effect. There is also, when we issue planning permissions, depending on the no, low or high risk status in terms of what the guidance, the maps we've been provided to the Coal Authority, we do make a reference on all our decision notices to that fact, and guide applicants who have been granted planning permission to the Coal Authority to discuss those matters further. But certainly on one of the planning applications that we dealt with for shale gas exploration, it was identified through the consultation process that it was potentially close to former mine workings, and so the Coal Authority had an input into that application. And again, that was, I would just reiterate that was under that policy context of policy M5.1 in the existing plan, which I feel is being replicated through the new policy MP12. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Smith, could you just respond? I think Mr. May made a point about the directional drilling, so that the site may be in one place, but the drilling may extend some distance from that site. Could you just respond to his point?
Yes, that is the case, and I'm trying to think how best to respond. It's yeah, and clear. I think site selection. There'll be limits. I understand as to how much directional drilling can be done, and that will play a part in the site selection process. And I suppose it does give an element of flexibility in terms of allowing developers, to look at alternative sites, because they do have that opportunity to directional drill. They don't necessarily need to go straight vertically down. They can directionally drill, and therefore that gives a bit more flexibility in terms of site selection.
And so any planning application would cover the entire area, including any sort of directional drilling.
No, the red line will be the surface development, but clearly, I've mentioned there are there's regulatory regimes. Which can take account of a directional drilling, 3,000 odd meters underground.
Right. Mrs. Osborne-James.
Thank you, sir. I just thought at this point it might be worth repeating something we had in the written statement in terms of the wider issues around seismicity, just to remind those participating that there are the other regulatory bodies involved in the process, and paragraph 4.111 of the justification text of the policy does list each of those bodies and specifically refers to the Oil and Gas Authority, who have the controls over mitigating seismic risks. And you'll be aware, sir, that the planning authority has to take the position of assuming that those other separate regulatory regimes will operate effectively. Thank you, sir.
Mr. May. Mr. May, did you want to respond?
Sorry, I was still muted. I do apologise. I'd like to come back about the Coal Authority, and in our submission we referred to the report by Professor Stiles, who has spent a lot of time working as a seismologist in the coal mining areas of Nottinghamshire. He submitted a report which stated, gave conditions under which hydraulic fracturing for shale should take place, including separation distances from coal mine workings and from faults. And one thing he stipulated was the fact that all information must be considered. And he was particularly referring to the coal industry records with regards to faults, etc. The planning guidance says that the amount of information to be considered prior to exploratory drilling is at the discretion of the operator. And I think in this regard, bearing in mind the record of shale gas fracking in the UK and Professor Stiles' obvious expertise in this field, there should be some sort of reinforcement there to ensure that a full risk assessment is carried out, and that the Professor Stiles' report is seriously considered as a valid document in this regard.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Cronin.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to pick up a few of the points that have been made. Firstly, in terms of coal mining, seismicity, and directional drilling. In terms of directional drilling, it's been a technique that's been used by the oil and gas industry for a number of years, and not just for shale gas, but for oil and gas development across the country. My understanding is that in the most recent applications in Nottingham, the actual plan itself, from a surface point of view, showed the cone of influence as a part of the red line. I'm sure colleagues will pick me up if that's not the case. In terms of coal mining seismicity, what we do is we take a number of elements of data. So we already have data that's been given to us by the Coal Board. We have our own 2D seismic data, and we also, as a part of the Infrastructure Act for shale gas, have to supply 3D seismic data as well. We also look at the data that the Coal Authority has, and as you know, the Coal Authority is a consultee as a part of any planning application. And all of that data is then, for shale gas, is presented to the Oil and Gas Authority, and that then requires a specific permission from the Secretary of State. We also have to go through a very similar process in terms of the Environment Agency with respect to seismicity and boundaries of faults, etc. So there's quite an extensive other part of the regulations that we have to go through. So that covers sort of directional drilling, seismicity, and coal mining, and we do take that very, very seriously. In terms of climate change and the need for gas, I think I want to make 2 or 3 very specific points. The Committee on Climate Change has said that by 2050 we will still need about 70% of the natural gas that we consume today, albeit it will be used in different ways. The government, post the change in the Climate Change Act have made a number of statements about oil and gas, as recently as November, where they say it's therefore critical that the UK continues to have good access to natural gas from both domestic and international markets. And I also think that there has been some recent planning applications around the West Burton gas-fired power station, where the inspectorate there said that specific planning applications do not have their own carbon budgets in terms of planning, and that's taken up on a more national level. And again, I think that's really important to contrast in terms of the planning regime versus the national regime. Of course, local issues with respect to emissions from the land, etc., are covered by planning, but they're also covered by environmental permitting, and we have our own specific permits with respect to fugitive emissions. So again, there's a regulatory overlap there. So I just wanted to make those points.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Glover, please.
Thank you, sir. I just wanted to clarify one point that Mr. Cronin made. The Springs Road planning applications, and this is just with regard to red lines and sort of zones of underground working influence. The planning application, and it has been repeated in other areas as well, but the planning application has a red line for the surface workings or surface infrastructure, and there is an indication of the surface projection of underground operations, and that forms part of the approved drawings for the planning consent when it was granted, and that sort of takes account of directional drilling and those types of techniques. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Cronin, did you wish to say anything else? Mr. Smith. Sorry, Mr. Cronin.
No, I don't. Thank you very much.
Mr. Smith.
Just very briefly, sir, just to say that, yes, I've found the plan that both Mr. Cronin and Mr. Glover have referred to. We could always forward that on to you if it would just give you an indication as to, you know, what we've been talking about. Yes, the red line is surface related, but there is a plan giving an indicative indication as to the extent of the subsurface development. And this was a planning permission we granted for 2 wells, one which was vertical, the other one being horizontal, and it was for the horizontal element that this plan was provided. But if you find that useful to be forwarded on, then that can be done.
Well, there's no need for you to forward that. Thanks very much.
Okay.
And Mr. May, please. Mr. May, you're on mute.
I do apologise. Sorry, sir. I'd like to come back on the issue of 3D seismic surveys. Looking at the reports and analysis of the well PNRZ1 at Preston New Road, where work had to be halted because of seismic activity, the well actually perforated at an oblique angle an unseen fault that wasn't picked up by 3D seismic survey. So I think we have to look at this and realise that these surveys are not exhaustive. There has been a comment that people like the Environment Agency and the Oil and Gas Authority may not have as much authoritative knowledge as an independent consultant, shall we say. With regard to climate change, in terms of gas supply, we notice that UCOO often talk about net imports, reducing net imports, not just stopping imports. It was interesting that at a community meeting in Letwell in 2017, somebody asked one of the INEOS executives, "Can you guarantee you won't export this gas?" To which he replied, "We are a commercial organisation." If this gas, I mean, we do export gas, this country does export gas in the summer when demand is low. if we just increase production on the UK continental shelf, and so it can be traded, the climate change emissions will be nullified. The saving climate change emissions will be nullified in that regard. And also, I'll leave the other points for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, well, I have no further questions. Does anyone else wish to say anything before we close this session? Okay, well, thank you all for your contributions to the session. Though the next session it is at 2 o'clock this afternoon, and that looks at development management policies. Okay, well, thank you all very much, and the hearing is now adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.